Hi, I'm Roz Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. And there are no prizes for guessing. We're going to talk about the banks. It's being called the biggest scandal since 2008. Lots of you want to know, will it actually have a lasting impact on the global economy? Well, we've live guests in New York, Nairobi, London and Brussels, and they're ready to answer any questions you have about this scandal. And of course, we couldn't let the hour pass without talking about the Shanghai Metro. Thousands of you have messaged the BBC about that campaign suggesting women should dress in a certain way to avoid sexual harassment. Well, we've got several guests joining us to talk about the latest banking scandal. Lest we forget, some of the biggest financial institutions are being accused of fixing interest rates, and Barclays Bank has already admitted doing it. We're live, so you can send messages for all of our guests at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. And rather than me doing it, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Let's start in London.
Hi, Roz. I'm the Reverend Peter Old. I'm an ordained Church of England priest, but I also work for a retail banking consultancy.
Very good to have you on the programme, Peter. From London to New York.
Hi, I'm Kate Long. I'm the leader of an open source financial reform project and a contributor to Reuters.
Kate, you're very welcome here on the BBC. And last but not least, to Nairobi.
Good evening. My name is Ali Khan Sachu. I'm the proprietor of a website, a financial portal called rich.co.ke, and thanks for inviting me on your show.
Well, Ali, Kate and Peter, it's a pleasure having you. Let me sit back, and all of us watching sit back for a few minutes and listen to you talk this through. All three of you, and maybe Peter, you could lead us off. Do you think the last couple of days have highlighted that the way banking is structured around the world is fundamentally flawed?
Well, I think what we're going to ask ourselves now really is, what do we want banks to do? The real question isn't just about bank structures, it's about what is the purpose of banks, what good can they do, and how can that good be turned to things which are bad?
Kate?
I would say the current Euro crisis really highlights the interconnections between banks and governments, and because governments have taken on so much debt, it's a very difficult time where the markets have been pushing the governments around, and it's reached a crisis with some resolution last night, although I'm not sure how lasting it will be.
But Ali, let's bring you in here. Surely what we've seen here is that bankers are only interested in their own wealth rather than the well-being of their customers.
Well, I think, banking has always been a Darwinian business. There's no banker that's going to last very long losing money. And I think in this particular instance, I'll take the other side and say, during this period in question, the markets were incredibly volatile. There were times when the Dow was moving 500 points. Banks were evaporating in front of our eyes over a 48-hour period, like Lehman. And I think you've got to contextualize this particular situation at Barclays, where potentially there could have been a massive run on the bank if Barclays declared the actual rates that they were paying. I agree they've been tilting the pitch. I agree they're wrong. But I think one's got to contextualize it in the situation. And in fact, I think, Bob Diamond's actually got ahead of this problem, whereas we're going to see a drip bad news story coming out about a lot of other banks. But we do have a systemic problem in the banking system. I think essentially that problem is around how much capital is spent gambling as opposed to doing the normal things like lending money and earning your spread. And I think, essentially we've given up. The regulators have taken a step back. The banks have largely gotten away with the situation and continue to play far too much money at the casino table. This might not be an example of that, but that's essentially the problem that I think countries are having to wrestle with, and essentially it puts a huge pressure on the national interest, on the country's balance sheet. And we're seeing that happen in places like Spain, where we're essentially Europe is having to bail out the banks.
Although,
and the
of course, it's worth mentioning, Ali, that it's been a rare good day for the Spanish banks today with that Eurozone deal, meaning they can get more support than perhaps they were expecting. Malik in Jamaica posts on Facebook saying, would you trust the cat to watch over the goldfish? Of course not, and it's the same thing with the banks. And here's a question from Atta, who's watching in South Africa, for all three of you. He asks whether you trust capitalism to deliver a banking system which serves us all. Perhaps, Kate, you could lead off on that.
Well, interestingly, countries serve a public purpose and banks serve a profit purpose. So when they become so married together, the interest gets mixed. And to restructure banks or to nationalize banks would risk losses throughout the system, from small individuals to insurance firms to pension funds. And I think governments have been hesitant to do that. But capitalism cannot continue in this casino banking method. We have too much debt, too much leverage, way too many derivatives in the world. We have $700 trillion of derivatives, and the global GDP is $70 trillion. So this whole system needs to be deflated in a sense, or brought down to a manageable size that allows commerce to increase, lending to go on. And we're just quite a ways away from any solution for that problem now.
Well, you say we're a way away from the solution. Peter, let's bring you in. Is capitalism going to provide us with the solution, provide us with the banking we need?
Well, I think rethinking how we do banking is, I'm not so sure that banks don't serve a public purpose. After all, if we didn't have banks, the whole economic life of our society would collapse. I think our friend in Nairobi put the nail right on the issue here. It's not bad when a bank makes money by providing a good service, by helping link funds to people who need funds. It's bad when we have this casino banking. I'm not sure I want to use that term, but when we have banks, it's essentially gambling their money and different people's money.
But Peter, it's not just gambling, is it? It's actually doing the wrong thing. It's fixing interest rates and the way that banks lend money to each other. That's not just taking a gamble, that's doing something we know is wrong.
Oh, absolutely, and that's a second part of the problem. But what we have to remember is that the whole idea of interest rates being set overnight by the LIBOR and so on is a good thing. It helps the monetary markets function. So what we have here is a good thing being used for bad purposes. And what we need to do, in a sense, is get back to the good purposes rather than just scrap the whole thing, because that's not the solution here.
Peter, you're live from London. Kate's in New York. Ali is live from Nairobi. Wherever you're watching, you're very welcome to take part. I'm particularly interested to hear from you. What do you want your bank to do? What do you look for when you approach a bank to take your money? You can post on facebook.com/world have your say. We've got a new phone number as well. You can use that. The number to call is country code 442031 624242. Calls coming in already from Egypt, Nigeria and South Africa. Let's pull up a comment on the BBC website from Adam, who has posted, people need to look at the bigger picture and understand the important work that bankers do on behalf of all of us, especially in terms of creating wealth. Ali, you were a trader in London. Do you agree with Adam? Doesn't sound like Ali can hear us. Well, Kate, I'll ask you the same question. Should we acknowledge the wealth that bankers create for all of us?
Absolutely, and there have been many periods of time when savers have received interest for their savings. People have made gains in stock markets and earned interest on bonds that they own. But because of the monetary easing, the situation is that retail basically is making very little now on their savings, while banks continue in the institutional side to make a lot of profit. There's many forces that have imbalanced the system, but it is truly unbalanced now.
Thank you very much.
What will...
Sorry, Kate, I thought you finished your point. Please do finish it.
Well, I would say for the ESM and the euro to pass lending directly through the banks is a short-term solution. It is not a structural solution to the issues that Europe faces.
Thank you very much indeed, Kate. Well, while we're sorting out that line to Ali in Nairobi, let's bring in Alia Papageorgiou, who is a European affairs analyst. She's Greek, but based in Brussels. Alia, thank you very much for your time. Tell us your conclusions from this latest banking scandal.
Hi, good evening, and thanks for having me on the show. It's a huge issue that's been building since 2007. I guess you could even say it's been building since 1930 with the Great Depression, where perhaps we should have taken stock even earlier before this economic crisis hit us. Today, in the European Council summit, the European leaders came to a conclusion which, as Kate says, perhaps it's only temporary, but they're aware that it's temporary. They're aware that they have to go much further eventually to, if that's the way that will be the winning way, which is to more further regulation, which for them it seems to be. But I think we're coming back, and I see it already in your conversation, which has already reached a great level, to transparency, regulation. Joseph Stiglitz came out with an article not 2 hours ago, was online, saying that this is even a threat to democracy, maybe just trying to shake things up, I guess, in the midst of this whole crisis. And
well, you mentioned that
leading us to believe that more regulation is the way that things are supposed to go. I'm not 100% sold, but obviously there's a major problem.
And you mentioned that Joseph Stiglitz article. We'll find that online and tweet it off BBC_WHYS. So if you're watching, you can find the article easily. David in Mumbai on our Facebook page says, banking is no longer a means to finance growth and help small or medium businesses. It's just about enriching the shareholders. Peter, is that true? There's been a shift in the emphasis.
I think banking still does serve the purpose of making economic activity happen. But yes, certainly in some financial institutions, it's about making money for the sake of making money rather than making money by providing a service. So I wonder whether actually what people want when they say that that they are fed up with the banks, what they actually want is just banks to going back to being banks. And most people on the high street doing high street banking don't understand, don't comprehend all the different things that their banks are actually doing. So stuff like we have here in the UK, where we are beginning to separate the high street banking from the merchant banking and all that kind of stuff, is actually a good move.
Peter, thank you very much. Kate, I can see you nodding. I'll come back to you. We've got to take a break in a moment. I'll come back to you in just a couple of minutes' time. I can see that we're getting calls from India, Norway, Pakistan and Cambodia. Kevin's watching in Kenya. Kevin, thanks for getting in touch. You want us to discuss why we actually need banks in the first place, whether we could develop alternatives. I'll put that to all of our guests in a couple of minutes' time. In the last few moments, we've had calls from some of you in Ghana and UAE. Please keep those calls coming. We'll put as many on the air as we possibly can. And Ben, James there telling us from the World Have Your Say team, lots of you are asking about punishment, why more bankers aren't facing the music in court. We'll get onto that in just a moment. But before the break, Kate in New York, you were nodding when I read an email saying banks have started focusing on profit above serving small businesses. I suppose the argument would be they could actually focus on both.
Well, that point I was going to make is the large global banks, it is very inexpensive for them to make loans to small businesses. They would much rather do a $200 million bond issue or loan to a global corporation than to do a $200,000 or $1 million loan to the local parts manufacturer or something. So it just structurally, it's very difficult for the large banks to lend to small and medium-sized businesses. And my own belief is that's where the economy is stalled, is that the big banks have the resources now, they have the deposits and the assets, but they don't lend into that channel. So it is a structural imbalance.
Okay, thank you very much. Kamwala's watching in Zambia. Thanks for tuning in, Kamwala. You're right, I wonder about certain African nations, because the bank watchdogs are not effective. There might be people watching in the UK and the US thinking much the same thing, Kamwala. You go on to say that hoarding can be an alternative. And we have had a number of messages from people in Africa, also in America, saying they keep some money under the mattress because they believe that's the safest place for it to be. Now, we have Kate in New York, Peter in London, Alia live with us from Brussels, and all three of you, I'd like to hear you talk about the issue of punishment, because lots of our viewers are raising this. Alia, are you satisfied that with the fines that we're seeing, huge, multi-million-dollar fines, that is a sufficient response to the way that some banks are behaving?
Well, today I didn't see any sufficient response. I saw a minister from the Treasury saying that this was the old government's fault because they left a gap in the legal system so that this couldn't come under criminal. Then I saw the Labour government saying this has to be criminalised. Then I saw a lord from Labour saying it's our fault because we left a gap in the previous legislation so that this can't be criminal. I don't see any proper response to this today.
Peter?
Well, I think it's more interesting to kind of ask ourselves what's going to make people change their behaviour in banks. Are we wanting to change people's behaviour by saying, if you do this and we find out, we will punish you and slap you a fine? Or do we actually want people who are involved in banking to modify themselves, to actually have a different stance towards how they view what they're doing?
But hold on a minute, Peter. If we go back to the riots in London, some people were jailed for taking a television which might cost a couple of $100, and people are thinking, well, hold on, people are serving jail time for that kind of theft, and yet here we have bankers making millions and millions of dollars, sometimes breaking the rules to do so, and yet fines are all they receive.
Well, don't get me wrong, Roz. What I'm saying is that if someone has committed a crime, then by all means go through the due process. But beyond that, there is then a question about how do you change people, and that is everything from people on the streets where we had riots here in the UK, all up to the banking towers and people working in those. How do you change people's hearts so that they want to do something different?
I would say that the way to change bankers' behavior is to claw back the bonuses and salaries that they made for several years, and then do what Iceland did when they had their banking crisis, which is they put the head of banks on trial, and they also put the head of the country on trial for allowing it to go on. It's serious stuff. People's lives are ruined. Their houses are taken. And, you know, for bankers to escape without any kind of punishment is outlandish.
And after, it's still in Iceland today, the money that goes in and out of the country is controlled for every single person, not just for the banks. So the regulation is much heavier than what it has been for the rest of the world in that country.
Yeah, and I think
Which is one good example.
important for us to ask, how much will regulation actually help change what people do, and how much do we need to, within banks, promote moral behaviour in banking?
I think that's the key. The key is the behaviour within the bank. I don't think that it's logical to expect every single member of the population to take on a responsibility for what the bankers are doing that we're not even aware of, that they're not even aware of. It seems completely logical. The point is that regulation up till now has done nowhere near enough. This is not a situation that we should have been in. I mean, it's easy to say in hindsight, but and obviously, as Peter said at the beginning, this was a really volatile period of time. Of course, the Barclays, Mr. Diamond, the CEO, has already said that they took measures to make sure that they didn't suffer as well from that. But, you know, it's a serious situation, as Kate said. I agree that has to be.
Let me just jump in here as well, because you're in Brussels. You'd have been watching this EU deal that we're getting details of today. It's worth mentioning that part of that deal is an agreement to form a joint supervisory body for the Eurozone's bank system. So that is another form of regulation being introduced in Europe, at least. The three of you have been talking about punishment. Robert Rhodes QC has written in the Times of London newspaper. You can see it there on the screen. It does seem extraordinary that nobody has been prosecuted. It gives the unfortunate impression that there is one law for the rich and another for the poor. Thank you very much indeed for pulling that one up. By the way, calls coming in from Portugal, Spain and Nigeria. Our new phone number is country code 442031 624242. Now, the word morality has cropped up in our conversation a few times. Let's bring back in Ali, who's a financial analyst in Nairobi, was also a trader in the City of London for a time. Ali, if you are exposed to the kind of money that you once handled, is it impossible to behave in a moral way? Does money in the end corrupt most people that come into contact with it?
I think, the banking world, the trading world is such a rarefied atmosphere. It's like being a football player or a centre forward for one of the top Premier League teams. And the only thing your focus becomes is scoring as many goals as you can. So I think to go and say, you know, philosophically we need to change the way bankers think, it's in their DNA. It's a Darwinian world. If you don't make money, you're out of a job. So the entire philosophy around it is towards making money. And I think that's a very, very difficult culture to change, or I'm not sure whether you really want to change it, because we live in such a competitive world, and if you need your brightest and your best in your banks, otherwise you're just not going to be able to compete with what is an extraordinarily fast-moving, fluid financial world that we now exist in. The other point I would like to make is about the regulator. You know, the regulator for more than a century has never been able to keep up. I mean, you can see this problem recurring on a continuous basis for 100 years, and it will continue to return. And I think part of the problem is that, you know, the rewards are skewed very, very short term. The liabilities stay on the balance sheet, but are not accurately measured. So the entire desire, the entire bias is towards making money quickly to get paid. And I think until we re-look at the incentivization, we're going to find it very, very difficult to change this culture. My last point was about
actually,
banking
one moment, before you make
in
another
Africa.
point, before you make another point, Ali, you've made several which I must get some of our guests to respond to. Peter, talk to me about morality. You are a Church of England priest as well as working in banks. Do you think that bankers are going to be inevitably corrupted by the amount of money they're exposed to?
Well, I think, you know, it's not money itself that corrupts, it's the love of money. I want to go back to what our friend in Nairobi said. I don't think there is anything wrong with making money. It's how you make the money. You know, you can use a derivative to help hedge a loan or investment. That's a good use of a financial instrument. Or you can use a derivative to basically gamble to see whether it will go up or down. That's a bad use of a derivative.
This is a fascinating point, whether there is anything morally wrong with earning the kind of money that Bob Diamond, the CEO of Barclays, does. Millions and millions of dollars every year. Is there anything morally wrong with that when many people live on $1 a day? You're very welcome to get in touch through facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. Nazir says Islamic banking is the solution. Joy in Ghana says she's going to close her account with Barclays. And Ridwan in India says, I'm a Barclays credit card holder. All I hope is that this scandal doesn't affect me. We're also getting calls from Germany, Bahrain, Belgium and Tunisia. Thanks for all of those and to all of our guests. We'll keep this conversation going in a few minutes' time. We'll also talk about that warning on the Shanghai subway that women should dress in a certain way to avoid being harassed. Now, just in case you missed this story, and to be honest, most of you didn't, judging by the number of comments that have come into the BBC, a Shanghai Metro operator posted a picture of a woman on the social networking site Weibo and wrote, "It's no wonder that some people get harassed if they dress like this." And from there, that happened on Wednesday, things really snowballed. Let's speak to three guests about this. Joanne Monaster is a lecturer at the University of Illinois. Jenny Wang's a student in Shanghai, and we're also joined by Sunny, a regular guest who lives in London. She's come into our studio. All three of you, you're very welcome. Well, Jenny in Shanghai, tell me if you thought this advice was useful.
Well, I don't really think so, because I think everyone have the opportunity to dress whatever they like, and they shall take the responsibility if something bad happened to them. Yep.
What about you, Sunny?
I think it's patronising. I think it's unnecessary. People dress a lot differently on the tube and the underground in London, and I think in many cases much more provocatively. I think the way this girl is dressed isn't actually that bad, you know? It's almost a floor-length dress. Her shoulders are covered. It seems like someone with a flash bulb has deliberately taken a picture behind her to show off her underwear.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's, last but not least, go to the University of Illinois.
Hi there.
Hi.
Well, so I think, yeah, she's wearing something. I got the same sense that it seemed like a flash bulb seemed to expose more than perhaps she planned, but I don't think it's the Metro's place to sort of blame a potential victim should she be harassed.
But let's be clear, and Jenny, you can talk to us about this. This issue of harassment is serious. The number of incidents is going up. Women are having problems with men abusing them, harassing them in various different ways. Surely it's worth thinking about how to stop that.
Yes, because lots of people feel like it's also the subway system's responsibility to, you know, take care of women, young women who dress up like that. But I personally feel like you dressing up like this, it's your, you know, your freedom, your choice. No one can just criticize you if you dress like that. But also you need to be aware that there is potential danger that if you dress like that, there might be sexual harassment. So, you know, with the increasement, I do really say it's freedom, but we need to be aware of the danger.
And I think the bigger point is that the Shanghai Metro are condoning, to me it seems, talking about sexual harassment, that girls should expect it if they dress like that. That to me is beyond the pale, that they're in some way saying it's the girl's fault, and I just don't think that's okay.
Joanne?
Yes, well, I do agree with that. I think that they, you know, to say it would be her fault, because as we know, we have people across the spectrum in the way they behave, whether they decide to control their urges to harass or not. It really should be on them to control that. So maybe the warning should go out to the potential harassers and not to the women and what they're wearing.
Right, when you have drunk drivers mowing down pedestrians, you don't warn the pedestrians not to be out at a certain time when the pubs close. You go after the drunk drivers, you campaign at them, not at the victims.
Yeah, and I feel like this sort of is like an advertisement. Actually, it's pretty common issue, but once it come up on the internet, a lot of people, you know, watch out to that issue, and all of a sudden this becomes a very hot piece of news. And later on, yesterday I saw the news that there is a man dressing very, you know, hot skirts, and it's also like advertisement after advertisement. Made me feel like very, you know, financially beneficial, not just, you know, a problem like clothing. Mm-hmm.
And all three of you, could I just ask you quickly before I read some of the messages being posted on Weibo, could I ask all three of you, do you ever think about the clothes that you're putting on if you know that you're going to be traveling on public transport in the 3 different places you live? Is that ever a consideration, how the clothes you wear might cause men to react? Sunny, perhaps you could go first.
There are some areas of London that I'm familiar with, you know, where my parents live, for example, slightly rougher areas. I wouldn't wear a short skirt and walk around there because I don't feel comfortable. That's not anything to do with my fault. I don't think it's anything that I could do differently. But the comments I get when I dress in what I consider still a normal way, just with a skirt on, with a dress on, the comments are just so uncomfortable. And it's a shame that I don't feel happy going to those areas. If someone's meeting me at the station, I don't like to wait by myself in those areas. I feel like, you know, it's just an uncomfortable situation to be in, even in London.
Joanne?
Well, I think in my position at a university, I'm going to, in general, dress professionally. Should I randomly run across a student or something like that? So I generally keep my attire professional and appropriate for the most part when I'm out in public. And then I think about my daughters, you know, depending on what they might choose to wear. I might occasionally say something like, you know, you think this will be okay for being seen in public? So occasionally it is a concern.
Do your daughters feel uncomfortable, or do you think that they've built up this sort of defense against that comment, the kind of the uncomfortable feelings that maybe you and I would feel?
Yeah, I think both of my daughters are pretty strong young women, so I don't think they'd have much concern. But I think if they were faced with real harassment, they might change their tune. They might decide to choose to wear something different. And by no means do I think my daughters dress inappropriately, but, you know, as they're growing, occasionally they want to experiment and try something new.
And it seems such a shame that they have to have a bad experience before they feel that they have to be a bit more careful. And that itself is a sad indictment.
And I wonder, Jenny, I can just see Jenny trying to come in as well. Jenny, when you're in Shanghai and you know you're going to go onto the subway, do you ever think about what you're going to wear?
Well, personally, I'm pretty traditional. I'm not dressing out like that hot. But I feel like once a girl is coming out with her friends, and she has sort of more braver to dress whatever she likes. But once she's alone, most of the girls is kind of reserved to dress like too hot. And it's also affected by the environment she's with. Like girls with the friends or dress up like those hot clothes will be pretty used to wearing clothes like that. But with some students like good students, they don't really do that. Personally, I feel like that.
Jenny, you're live with us from Shanghai. Wherever you're watching, you're very welcome to take part in World Have Your Say here on the BBC. Tutex is in Freetown, watching from Sierra Leone. He posts on our Facebook page, "Ladies in Shanghai, please dress properly," he writes. "This is some bad dressing for girls, and the Chinese government is right to try and stop this." And the reason this has become a huge story is because thousands of people on Weibo, the social network based in China, picked up on it. Kitty posted this on Weibo. "You can't ask everyone to pretend to ignore you when you are wearing such revealing clothes."
There's a difference between being ignored and then, asking for harassment. If you dress in a certain way, maybe you want someone to look at you, but that doesn't mean you want the nasty comments or even someone to touch you inappropriately. So I think there's a line there.
But hold on, Sonny, I'm confused because you started off by saying this kind of advice from the Metro people is completely inappropriate. You then went on to say that it's sensible in certain parts of London for a woman not to wear certain types of clothes. So what's the problem in offering women advice that you appear to be giving to yourself?
My comfort levels, I know, right? So I judge what is appropriate for me and when it's appropriate to wear. Someone telling this complete stranger girl on the subway that she shouldn't be dressing like that, that is inappropriate. Unless she has been assaulted or harassed, then giving her direct advice, I think, is inappropriate. She gets to choose how she dresses. She may want to court people looking. If you're a pretty girl, you might want people to look.
You have admitted just a couple of moments ago that how you dress may affect what happens to you. And if this is a serious problem on the Shanghai Metro system or indeed public transport anywhere else, surely it's not so unreasonable for the people in charge of that public transport system to say, be careful, if you dress like this, this is more likely to happen.
You can dress in a certain way to attract attention, but that does not warrant someone touching you or harassing you. I think that's the line that I want to draw. You can dress sexily, but you shouldn't dress like a sex worker. And I think in London, sometimes you do see people dressed like prostitutes. And this girl was not dressed like that. So in this case particularly, that advice was patronising and it was completely unwarranted.
NC Walters is watching us in Cameroon, says women should dress decently. No matter how grown up a man is, the power of a woman's nakedness can push him to act, he says. Let's shift from Cameroon to Nairobi. We can speak to Dominica Doppio, an author and associate professor of literature at Makerere University in Kampala. You're very welcome here on the BBC. What do you make of this story?
I honestly agree with the fact that it is important to dress decently, especially in public. When you are alone in your room, you can dress the way you want. But when you step out, you know you are going to interact with other people. You are sharing the same space. And I believe really decency is cross-cutting, It doesn't matter who you are, which culture you belong to. There is, I think, a certain level.
But Dominica, do you think this girl was dressed inappropriately? Do you feel that the picture is inappropriate? Because in my opinion, I don't think it is inappropriate. If it's a hot day, she's wearing a sheer dress, it's not see-through, it is a full-length dress, she's covered her shoulders. I don't think it's inappropriate for a hot day on the underground. I really don't.
I do agree with you entirely on a hot day. Let me just I'm here, I live in Africa. In Europe, when it is summer, you see people almost strip and it's extremely acceptable because you understand where people are coming from and the seasons have changed. And in that kind of context, there is totally no harassment, you understand. But I'm afraid I've not seen this picture properly to comment. So my comment is just a bit general on the issues of decency, But I do understand in a certain context, dressing almost half naked is
Dominica Doppio and Sonny, let me read you this message from Shruti in New Delhi, who's posted on Facebook. Even if we dress modestly, men are always the same. The first time I was groped, I was covered from top to bottom with no skin showing. So some women watching us, Dominica, are saying men are going to grope women whatever they wear.
Right, which makes the advice even more unnecessary.
That is true.
Carry on, Dominica.
That is so true. That's true. It's true. Even when a woman dresses very decently, men look at women. Someone once told me, actually, men are very visual. They look at women, whether you dress decently or not. So that calls for another caution for men also, that, I mean, you know yourself, you know you're very visual. Therefore, you should also exercise some degree of self-control.
Well,
that's actually what yes.
Dominica, that's an interesting idea. Rather than the Metro giving advice to women, perhaps you're suggesting it should be giving advice to men. I wonder if those of you watching us here on the BBC agree with that. If you want to get your comments on the air, we've only got a few minutes left, so keep posting them at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay or using any of the other contact details on the screen. We'll be back in a couple of minutes' time. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're talking about how to stop men groping women on public transport and whether women dressing in certain ways could help with that. Let's bring in Ben from the World Have Your Say team to hear about the calls we've been receiving.
Yeah, Abdul called us just now from Saudi Arabia. He says, I went to the US and I wanted to wear my national dress, but I sacrificed my freedom for my own safety. I didn't want anyone to make a mockery of me. You should respect where you go. So that's one parallel from him. Roland's phone from Cameroon. He said women need to be careful the way they dress. The line did go dead then, so Roland, please call us back and elaborate a bit on that. It's country code 44 20 31 624242. On our previous conversation about bankers, still calls coming in on that too. Joanna called from Spain. She says leave the item on accusing the banks. Start with the politicians of each country. That's where the problem lies. I should tell you, Ros, in just over an hour on BBC World Service Radio as well, I'll be talking about where Germans see their place in the Eurozone. So, of course, after that deal in the early hours of this morning that Angela Merkel has described as a good compromise on the Eurozone. Also, Ros, is it ever OK to cry at work? Millions of you have been watching this video of US TV host Ann Curry tearfully leaving the Today Show couch after 15 years. It's sparked a massive conversation online. We're going to talk about that too.
I have to say, Ben, I watched that. It took me about an hour and a half to recover from it. I found it so intense. It certainly was a very tearful goodbye. We'll be talking about whether that is ever OK, whether it's on the telly or not. You can listen to Ben on World Have Your Say on BBC World Service Radio. You can stream that, bbcworldservice.com, in just over an hour's time. Now, let me ask all four of our guests on this subject. There are men watching this programme who feel if you dress in certain ways, they may not be able to contain themselves on public transport. They may feel they want to grope you. What would you say to those men? Let's quickly ask all four of you. Jenny in Shanghai first.
Well, I think it has its meaning, but also, meanwhile, I feel like men needs to be aware of the danger as well, because as the society develops, lots of men wear, sexy clothes. Some wear dresses, skirts, and others wear, they share a lot of their body out to other people. So while this will help men to watch out for, this will be safer for women, men needs also, be aware of the danger around them as well.
Jenny, thanks for speaking to us and thanks for staying up so late. We appreciate you doing that. Joanne, what would you say to men who feel sometimes they can't control themselves if you dress in a certain way?
Well, when you look at a beach and there are women in bikinis, they're not being harassed. So I think it's very clear that men are perfectly capable of controlling themselves. And this may vary from culture, to communities, to different families, what's expected. But the truth is they are all perfectly capable of controlling themselves, just what's acceptable to them and in their society. So it is important to get the word out that women do not deserve to be harassed or groped or anything, no matter what they're wearing, whether they're fully covered or might be exposing a little more than
Joanne,
usual.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid I have to apologise to Dominica and Sonny, who are both chomping at the bit to come in. We're completely out of time. I promise you both we'll invite you back on World Have Your Say and continue to hear your contributions. I'm sorry we don't have time to speak to you now. Thanks to all of you who have called. I apologise if we didn't get your comment on air. You can carry on the discussion online. I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.